Welcome back, everyone, to the Shock Absorber podcast. It is wonderful to have you along with us, whether you are deciding to listen on your favourite podcast app or you're just watching us on YouTube or listening on YouTube. I do a lot of that these days. I'm welcoming one person to the Third Space studio with me. It's Tim. Hello.
Hey, Joel.
Hello. You left rather abruptly from the last episode.
I did, yes, apologies for that.
But that's all right. And this time we just decided we won't have Stu.
Yeah, make up for lost time.
Yeah, that's it. You said you're already well. That's good. We start every episode with a cultural artifact or a movie or even a podcast or something that is on our mind. And you've got one for us called High Ground.
High Ground.
Is that right?
Yeah. So this is a 2020 Indigenous Australian film that came out. It's been called a meat pie western.
Pie western?
Well, you know how you have spaghetti westerns, which are like the Italian westerns. This is an Australian western, and so it's got a lot of those tropes of the western kind of classic western movies, but it's set in post-World War II, I think it is, post-World War II. Oh, sorry, post-World War One.
Right.
Northern Territory, up in Arnhem Land.
Okay.
And so there's interactions that happen between the Indigenous crew there and the white settlers, the mission. You've got stockmen who are, and a whole lot of violence ensues. Quite a violent film, actually. But the thing that was in my mind when I first watched it was I really liked the opening scene. The opening scene, you start with this young Indigenous kid who is getting himself ready for the hunt. And so he's painting himself up with the white paint. I presume it's a camouflage. But yeah, he's getting himself ready for that. Almost too much on it. And then he goes out with his weapons and he's hunting. And then you cut to, he's got some uncles who are also hunting the same wallaby. And he basically stuffs up the hunt by going too early or making some sound, and they come in and give him a little bit of a reprimand, but also helping him walk alongside him and coach him and say, oh, here's where you went wrong, here's why it didn't work, why are you out here in the first place, you should be here. Like, they had this big conversation that goes around it. But what struck me when I first watched it was I really liked the relationship that exists there, and you've got a particular unique cultural setting that have cultural values and practices that they want to pass on to the next generation. You've got the next generation who is seeking to put those practices and values into place, doing it less than perfectly. And then you've got the older crew who come alongside and continue to help in that coaching process and say, okay, well, here's what we can learn from that, here's what we can do better. And I really liked that because it was on my mind when I watched this film that is kind of what we're doing in churches in terms of we have particular cultural things, we have particular values, we have particular beliefs. And our hope for the kids, our own kids, but also for all the kids in our church, is that they grow up to own those values for themselves, to know what we believe and to love what we believe and to believe it for themselves, to own our cultural practices and put it into practice themselves. And through that also to be shaping the way that we do church as well. And that's the whole Shock Absorber idea, that we're listening to the young people and they can help shape the way we do things. So there's this dynamic relationship between the old and the young as we go forward in culturally distinct kind of ways. And so that was kind of on my mind, and we're talking today about children's ministry and intergenerational ministry, and I just thought that movie is often stuck in my mind as not a church faith version, but a nice version of here is cultural values and practices being passed on to the next generation, and really, really lovely interaction in the way that that's done. Yeah,
I like it how you call it a dynamic relationship, because that's what we try to practice here at Soul Revival, and you saying, and we try to say it as a staff team as well, is that we see the children in our church, not just the church of tomorrow, but the church of today.
Yeah.
Is that right? Did I say that right?
Yes, they are the church of today, not just the church of tomorrow.
Yeah, so,
that's
okay.
absolutely
I got it
right.
the wrong way around.
No, that's all right. But yeah, no, that's absolutely what we want to do. And there's a anthropologist whose work I bounce off quite a bit called Barbara Rogoff, and she talks about participants in a culture. And she likes that word more than members, because a participant is someone who is acting into the culture, being shaped by the culture, but also shaping culture. So there's this reciprocal relationship. And I think that's exactly, she's capturing there what we talk about when we talk about the shock absorber, that you need the flexibility of the young, the strength of the mature, and together you can actually go forward. Yeah.
Well, as you said, we're going to particularly touch on children's ministry and the strategy of children's ministry. But I thought, you are the children's pastor here at Sorrel Old Church. I thought, do you want to just give us a really quick rundown of perhaps why children's ministry is so important to you? Because it's not just, you don't just work one day a week at church and kind of organise a few things around children's ministry. You practice that in your other job as well, in youth works. You research it a great deal. And I know that intergenerational ministry and how children's ministry is part of that is really important to you. So I'd really love to hear that first. We've probably gone over it previously in some other podcast episodes, but it'd be cool to hear just the quick 1 minute, 2 minute version of why you enjoy it so much.
Yeah.
And you chose it as a career, really.
I mean, yes, it is. It's definitely a vocation. Like this is, unless God says otherwise, I'd love to be doing children's ministry for however long I've got left, another 45 years, statistically speaking.
Well, you've planned it out that far.
Well, I haven't planned it out. I just kind of know the rough average of an adult male in Australia. But, yeah, I mean, from my own, I guess, biography, like I don't know where necessarily that's come from, other than I had really great experiences in children's ministry, really valued both churches that I'd experienced children's ministry in, was able to lead children's ministry from fairly early on, and so just really enjoyed it from that perspective. And through that, as I've grown in children's ministry and my leadership of it, and gone from a volunteer leader as a teenager through to helping run churches and now advising churches, just further and further convicted on that children can and do have faith, and the purpose of children's ministry is to grow them in that faith. And so I talk about faith is it's head, heart, hands. So it's the stuff that we know about Jesus. It's the way that we love and express that love and relationship we have with Jesus, and it's our obedience to Jesus. So short phrase is we want kids to grow in their knowledge, love and obedience to King Jesus. So that's what I think children's ministry is. And so that's why we want to keep working at really excellent children's ministry and working at how do we do that really, really well. And so, it's a great joy that I get to spend most of my week helping others think through that in their churches, and then get to play around with that at Soul Revival for a day a week.
Get to enact that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Actually hang out with kids.
Yeah. I was just going to ask one more question about that. Is it sometimes you hear about in multiple different churches, so I'm not trying to single anyone out here, but that almost like children's ministry or youth ministry is seen as almost like a stepping stone towards, a senior minister or assistant minister role or something like that. I'd be interested, because you said you want to do children's ministry for a very long time, up until, are you saying that you're going to be 90? Is that what you, what's the
now.
age?
Okay. 85.
85, okay.
Is roughly.
Let's go 90 anyway.
Okay. Oh, I've got 50 years left. You just added a whole 5 years.
Yeah. Well, what would be your argument against that kind of approach to just seeing as a stepping stone? Because I think I really like the way you approach it, and I really agree with it, but I think some people don't, and I'd love to hear why you think the way that you're approaching is probably, an ideal way.
I think there's a number of factors, obviously, as there always is. So it's a complex picture. Part of the structure of the, churches is you have to be a really large church in order to afford a full-time children's minister. And so that means that someone who is convicted that they want to do vocational children's ministry, there's actually not that many jobs available in many churches. So,
especially full-time, like you say.
Well, that's right, the full-time. And so if you want someone who sees it as their full-time vocation, and you want to equip them for that, and you want to give them a living wage so that they can afford a family and housing and food and whatever for their kids, and you actually want them to make their life out of it, there's just not that many jobs where that exists, and so there just can't be many opportunities for people to do children's ministry long term. So there's structural things there. Part of that is our choice of staffing, and this probably comes to our thinking about what are the ministries worth investing in. So there are most churches, if they have a choice of putting on a new full-time pastor, would put on another full-time congregational pastor or something like that in order to help minister to the adults in the church, split the adult ministry, relieve some sermon prep. You know, there's lots of things. And again, they're all very good and worthwhile things. But it does mean that children's ministry is often the last job in a church. Or if it is, it's, we can afford a day a week, we can afford 2 days a week, we can afford, whatever it is. But it's not enough for someone to say, okay, I'm going to consciously choose a 2.5 day a week job, and out of that support a family, afford to live, all those kind of things. So you either need to be married to someone who can, pull in a much bigger pay packet, or be young and single and not many dependents and not many expenses. And so that's why there are a lot of young children's and youth ministers who by necessity have to grow up in ministry and take assistant ministry jobs or school teaching or other things that compete with that. And so there's structural things going on. There's conscious choice. Unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people who value children's ministry as a utility, not as intrinsically good. So I got encouraged once, and it remains one of the most frustrating memories in my mind. We're encouraged by a minister who said, it's great that you do excellent children's ministry because that brings families to the church. And I was young at the time and I couldn't quite articulate it the way I could now. But when I look back, I think, my frustration with that was they were devaluing the actual discipleship and faith of children. So I would come back now and say, actually, no, I want excellent children's ministry because children can and do have faith, and it is worth investing in them and seeing their faith grow. And if parents happen to enjoy that about a church and also come, then that's fine.
Yes.
But that's not why I'm doing it. I'm not doing excellent children's ministry to attract families. And often behind that, the statement is actually you're attracting financial backers. And that's the other thing about children's and youth ministry. And I see this internationally with a number of friends that I interact with on social media and other places where sadly it's because children and teenagers don't contribute to the financial running of a church, they're not invested in. So we invest in adult ministry because adults, if they become members, then give financially, we can afford to keep doing ministry. And absolutely recognise that that's a realistic position for any place. I mean, you have to be able to afford ministry.
Yeah.
But it does also mean that we don't, there are many places where children's and youth ministry is not invested in to the level that certainly someone who's passionate about it would love to see.
Yeah. And as it seems like that approach seems like a reasonably short-term approach as well. If it's only for financial, well, it's backed by thinking of like this will help financially. I don't think it's really helping, like you're saying, the children develop their own faith.
No, because it'd be very rare for someone to voice this out loud and say,
Yes.
I'm trying to do this because I'm making financial commitments.
Right.
But the reality is that is what makes decisions, and we make a lot of our decisions based on finances.
Yeah.
It'd be very hard pressed to find a minister who would say, I don't believe children can and do have faith.
Yeah.
But enacted practice often looks like that we put that low on the priority listing.
Yeah.
And it's fine if children's ministry is under-resourced. It's fine if children's ministry is a second thought. If it's over there, we don't really worry too much about it. As long as it's taken care of, I don't have to think about it. So now I'm painting a pretty bleak picture. There's really excellent ministries that I interact with, and lots of really, really fantastic children's ministers who love their job, who do excellent ministry, and there's lots of senior ministry staff that I interact with who also love and value kids. So
I don't think you're trying to be negative. I think because you're passionate about it and see it as really important, you're frustrated. You can be frustrated sometimes where other people don't see the value in that as well. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Well, so let's talk something more positive. Strategy of children's ministry is something that we want to chat about today. You brought up, just as we were kind of preparing for the episode, a kind of saying called that said metaphors shape your ministry. What does that mean? Because that comes from a book, right?
It does. So there's a great book called Children Matter by Scotty May and others. There's about 4 authors on that one. Yeah. But the book, it's a really excellent textbook on children's ministry. So it's thick, it's dense, it's really well. It's worth, and we use it at YouthWorks College all the time.
390 pages, I just saw.
390 pages, yeah. So it's quite chunky, accessible but deep. So I really like it as a textbook. Don't agree with all of it, but that's what a good textbook should be, right? But one of the things, this is a phrase, I think it's their first chapter actually, called Metaphors Shape Ministry. Mm-hmm. And it's all about the idea that what do we think of when we think of children's ministry, and that will play out in the way that we think about the teacher in the room, even the word teacher. What we think of the adults who are in the room, what do we think of the children who are in the room, what's their role in the space, and also what should the space look like, what should you be doing in your space, what should your time together look like, what should the energy be? What should the furniture be? What should the activities be? There's all of these things flow out of what kind of metaphor is your primary metaphor that you're using. So the examples that they use, there's 5, of which one I don't think I understand. So let's go with 4.
Okay.
The first one they talk about is the school model. So this is classic Sunday school and if you are coming in with children's ministry with a school metaphor, then what does that mean? Well, it means the adults in the room are teachers and the children are students. It means you're going to really heavily go with educative type metaphors. So it's going to be quite cognitive.
The head thing.
Thing, yeah. So you might be learning things by rote. It might be, let's learn the 10 Commandments by rote. Let's learn the fruit of the Spirit by rote. Let's do a lot of memory verses. I remember, I don't think you find anywhere now that does it, but go back a few decades and there used to be Sunday school exams. So
really?
You'd have tests at the end of a term or end of a session where did you remember all the things you've learned? So very much a schooling model. Right, yeah. And so that plays out. And I think there's a lot of children's ministries that even if they're not consciously doing this, effectively that's what they see. They think of the adults in the room as teachers. They think of the young people as students. It's very educative. It's very cognitive. And so that's a fairly predominant metaphor that goes on. The next one they talk about is the gold star winner prize model. And so this relies really heavily on external rewards. So it might be, and I grew up actually, one of the churches I was at before Guymere, I remember we had a star chart in the children's ministry and you got gold stars, and because I was a pretty learned student and pretty self-directed, I remember I got lots of gold stars. So it was for learning memory verses. I remember I was in maybe year 3 or year 4 and I learnt the Apostles' Creed and I learnt the Lord's Prayer and all these kind of things because they were all worth gold stars. And so lots of extrinsic rewards. And so what you're fostering then is not necessarily competitiveness, though there is a little bit of that. Like you want to achieve. No one really loses unless they don't do the memorisation. But it's very
extrinsically motivated.
Totally. Yeah. And the strength of it is you can actually get good buy-in because kids are naturally competitive. They actually want to achieve. And so you tell kids, hey, you can get a Freddo, you can get a lolly if you learn the memory verse. If anyone can remember the point of last week's talk, you get a blah, blah, blah. So it ties into that natural childlike competitiveness that they have. And so can be positives of that. The downside is you can actually start to breed a sort of self-righteousness, or I can do this God stuff by my own strength. So you either breed pride because they're doing really well, they've got lots of gold stars and it's really awesome, or you breed shame because particularly kids who maybe can't, they might have additional needs, which means they can't just memorize verses, they find it hard to struggle in school, or whatever it is. So you breed pride or shame, and then also if I stop getting extrinsic awards, what's going to happen? So at some point, you've probably had this with your kids, definitely had it with mine, like when they were very young, we had little stamp charts or gold stars for, can you put the pajamas on by yourself? Can you brush your teeth? Can you eat your dinner? Like there are things that you're building extrinsic awards, but you've got success is not getting the gold star. Success is they get to a certain age and they think of, I've got to brush my teeth, and they do it automatically by themselves. And that's kind of what we want for our kids. We want them to be memorizing verses or enjoying church or bringing friends or whatever it is, not because they get a Freddo, but because they actually find it intrinsically motivated. So at some point you got to break that.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense, because I'm trying to think, because I have 3 children, and I would say my son, who Leo, well, you know all my children, but Leo is very intrinsically motivated. So I don't know if we did that as much.
Okay.
But having said that, my youngest, Remy, who is 2.5, she just has started using the toilet, and she was allowed to have a chocolate when she used the toilet, because she was able to do it, but she kept choosing. It was almost like choosing not to.
Yeah.
And we had to put a stop to that pretty quick, because she was having chocolate 3 or 4 times a day. It was like, this isn't appropriate.
I did it again.
Yeah, that's what it was like. I have chocolate. That's what she was doing all the time. So, I can. You at some point, and I think like my middle daughter, who's quite extrinsically motivated to a certain degree as well. But it only goes so far. It feels like until you take something on for yourself.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it won't be sustained long term. If it's just extrinsically rewarded,
Okay.
Yeah. So that's the gold star model. The third model they talk about is the carnival model, and this came.
This sounds fun, by the way.
Oh, totally, absolutely. And it's a very sort of American 1990s kind of model, in that where this thought came through that you should make your kids program the best hour of a kid's week. And so it'd be all about putting on as big an event as possible, really huge, big props, puppets, fun, loud songs, dancing. You get to some of the very large churches in America that have massive budgets for their children's ministry department. They talk about, there's one church they know of that has a full-size fire engine inside their kids' department, where the kids get to climb over and dress up as and ring the bell, and and that's the kind of thing. Like if you've got scale and you've got budget, you can go nuts with this stuff, and it can look like a wonderland of enjoyment and fun and pop. And the idea is, again, you're creating an experience for kids that they really enjoy coming to, because if they enjoy coming, then you've captured their attention, and now you can tell them about Jesus.
Well, it sounds very much linked to the kind of professionalism that we've been talking about in the last couple of episodes. Is like, just put on the best thing that we can possibly do.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you think of what's the best thing from a child's point of view, you're going to end up like something like Disneyland. And so that is what the best possible, without the cues. So this is the best thing we can possibly do. And so it's all about bright, it's all about fun. And so again, it does capture kids' attention, and it is really exciting. And you could do something, if you had a right budget, that is the best hour of a kid's week, which is awesome. But again, there's significant shadows to that. It's very hard and expensive to pull off.
Yep.
So it takes a huge amount of resources.
I feel like it'd be exhausting to do if you're doing it every week.
Totally. So it really high leader investment, which potentially could lead to burnout and weariness. And again, you're also fostering this idea that church is all about me. And so you go from really high energy children's ministry to probably something that looks like an incarnational youth ministry, so very youthy, very fun, lots of skateboards and band nights and pizza nights and all these kinds of things to keep trying to keep their attention. And what you're training them in is, I've got to keep your attention in order to tell you about Jesus, rather than a relational idea, which we'll get to in a sec. But so there's, and also the other thing is that life is not always fun and joyful. And if this is their experience of church every week, is that it's big and it's bright and it's fun and it's enjoyable, then what about the kid who's sad? What about the kid who's had a really hard week? Is there possibility to lament with those kids and to actually say, yeah, life sucks sometimes? We're doing Revelation for our week away coming up, and I'm thinking about the kids programming. And one of the talks is about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which I don't think I'll go into the 4 horsemen necessarily, though we did have a very funny discussion about bringing horses down and dressing them up. But the point of that passage is that Revelation is all about unveiling and revealing what is actually going on behind the scenes. And the point of that chapter is actually behind the scenes there are these forces of sickness and poverty and war and death that are impacting our lives. And we do experience those things. And so I'm trying to work out at the moment how to sit with the kids a week away and say, let's just recognise that life really sucks sometimes. It's really hard. Yeah. And kids don't have to be very old to realise that life's not perfect. They experience hardship. And so a carnival atmosphere doesn't really allow for those kind of moments, which is really deeply formative for kids.
Yeah. I mean, like even if a pet passes away or something like that, this is all something that will obviously play out across this episode, but it's kind of like, children experience things a little bit differently, but that's just because it's developmentally appropriate for their age.
Yeah.
So whatever is going on for them, if there's no opportunity for them to experience that, you're saying that it's almost like at church, you only can be happy.
Well, that's right. If you got a kid turn up to kids program, and their pet rabbit has just died. We had this a number of years ago. A dog broke into our backyard and killed our bunny rabbits. And there was the next afternoon when I actually told the kids about it, because they weren't there at the time. Zali just went and sat on the trampoline, and I, after a while, went up to her and said, what do you think? Do you need to talk about anything? She goes, no, I just need to sit here and be sad for a while.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's cool. That's appropriate.
And this is another thing that we'll get out, is that I love how kids teach us stuff like that.
Totally, yeah. But you say to that kid, imagine if Zali turns up the next day to kids program.
To the fire engine.
And the leaders go, oh, your pet died. Come and dress up as a fireman and
get on the ladder.
Where's the space in that? And so it's a sometimes appropriate but not comprehensive way of how we should be explaining. And we talk about sober joy all the time as a church, and that's, it gets the joy right, but it misses the sober to really have this carnival atmosphere. And also, like slowly long term, church is not always the best hour of my week. Lots of other cool things happen in my week, and sometimes church isn't awesome. Yeah. But there's a discipline of going to church regardless of what I feel like. So again, they're very extrinsically rewarded, and we're trying to, there's a certain sense we appropriate to build something else as the foundation of church.
Yeah, that makes sense. The fourth one?
The fourth one is called the Pilgrim's Journey model. And there's bits about this that I really like. So the idea here, and again, part of these metaphors is, how do you understand the adults in the room and how do you understand the children in the room? What I really like about this metaphor is that it breaks down the power dynamic between those two, where we recognise that we are brothers and sisters in Christ together, and we're all just on this journey of faith. And this is what I really like about kids program is I get to go in and I get to help children unpack the Bible, but also that they will teach me things. So they'll be asking me questions, or they'll be responding to answers, and they'll be wondering about ideas. It actually helps me to learn and to think and to wonder. So there is an important aspect where I do want children's ministry to not be I'm the teacher and I have all the answers, so you just sit and listen to me. But let's wonder about this together. Let's explore this together. Because actually the point of this is not to focus on me, the teacher, it's to focus on Jesus, who is King. And so together we can wonder about King. Now, you take that to its conclusion and you actually lose all authority. And there are particular philosophies of children's ministry that will go all the way with this idea, and you lose any authority in the room and everyone is just a pilgrim together. And I don't want to go all the way there. I think that God, Paul talks in Ephesians that God gives teachers, pastors, shepherds, etc. to the church. So there is an appropriateness to leadership. And so for me to neglect the fact that I am older, more mature, more studied, would be a neglect of my power and authority in that space. And so I am a fellow pilgrim, but I'm not just a fellow pilgrim. I'm a more experienced pilgrim, perhaps in some ways. I like to think of the curator of a museum or an art gallery who's maybe hosting a group and saying, hey, check out this painting here. Yep. And they've studied it. Like they might have a degree in art history. And they know all about the artists and the time period. They can tell you about the culture and why they use colours in that way and why this bit looks bright and bold and this bit looks dark. But the focus is on the painting. And as the more experienced guide, they can help the others experience. And so, but there's still a power imbalance in that it's appropriate that the guide has the authority and they've got the microphone and they're telling you about it. And someone in the crowd might go, oh, have you ever noticed that corner over there where there's that weird little thing going on? And the guy might go, oh, actually, I don't know. I've never noticed that before. That's really interesting. I'm curious. I'm going to go study more about that. And that can happen in kids ministry. Kids can ask questions and they go, I don't know. Never thought about that. That's awesome. And I'm learning from them. So, so that's the model. I've got some resonance with it, but I don't want to go all the way with it. And then the last one is they talk about dance with God. And that one, I don't think I really understand.
I don't know what that means, though.
You
don't either?
Not really. I don't know it well enough to explain it. Okay.
I appreciate your honesty.
It's just a little vague. And maybe that's because I don't resonate with it at all. So anyway, these ideas that all these metaphors are shaping our ministry, and some conversations that I've had over the last couple of weeks have been, well, what's our metaphor for ministry that shapes the way we do children's ministry here at Soul Revival? And it comes back to how we started this series, all about friendship. And I think that friendship is the primary metaphor that we use across our church. And like those other metaphors, all of these implications flow from it in terms of how we consider the people in the room set up, what we do with our actions. That's our defining metaphor, I think, as a church, is the friendship. So because of Jesus' death and resurrection, we've been reconciled back into relationship with friendship with God, and he then co-reconciles us to each other. And so we are friends with each other. And so if people want to go back a number of episodes, there was 3 or 4 in a row where we bounced around that idea of friendship.
And especially around the verse of John 15:15, where it says that I call you my friend. Jesus says, I call you my friends.
Yeah, you're no longer my servants, I call you friends. Yeah, totally.
So if the primary metaphor around our children's ministry strategy is friendship, what do you think that looks like? Because I think we talk a lot about intergenerational ministry on the Struggle Silver as well, and that's that would be another primary metaphor, I think, for how we approach church. How does that fit in with our intergenerational strategy? And because I think there's talking to you and understanding how much you, because you teach a subject on intergenerational ministry at YouthWorks, how does that play out? Because I feel like, is there a way that churches do that differently in terms of their intergenerational strategy with children?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's lots of different ways to express intergenerationality, and there's also a lot of ways that churches think they might be doing intergenerationality, which I often push back and go, but is it really?
Right.
And so one of the key ways that people talk about, that they say, we're doing intergenerational ministry, is that they have kids in the service for the first 15, 20 minutes. They might do a kids spot, they'll do some songs. The kids will participate in some of the liturgy. People were doing that long before the word intergenerational ministry came around. So it's not a new idea, but people will often look at the way they do that and go, oh, look, we're being intergenerational. And my gentle pushback would be, well, it's not necessarily intergenerational. And this is something my friend Chris Barnett in Melbourne has helped me think through. There's a difference between multi-generational and intergenerational. And his difference is, he's bouncing off some ideas of the difference between multicultural and intercultural. So, so he's taken from a few different places. So multi implies that you have different generations together in the same space. So most churches would be multi-generational. You'd look around and you would see people of different generations all in the same place.
Even if you had families.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a family, there we go. Automatically you've got 2 generations. Yeah. You have a couple of seniors, you've got now 3 generations. So there's
multiple generations.
Yeah, you've got multiple generations and they happen to exist in the same space as each other. And so that's multi-generational. And that's good. That's wonderful. And there might be a whole lot of accidental benefits that you get from that. But the reason I say accidental is because the shift from multi-generational to intergenerational, the key shift is you have put those generations together intentionally.
Okay.
And so just because you've accidentally got different generations together is not intergenerational. The inter comes from the intentional. And that's really, really key. And what happens there is that when you intentionally bring the generations together, then you can start to form these relationships. And that's why I'm not sure which one's prior, the friendship or the intergenerational. Maybe the friendship's prior. Anyway, but you're looking at intergenerational through the lens of friendship, and that is that it's all about the relationships that you're building together. And what you're looking for in those friendships is you intentionally bring generations together, and then they get to mutually co-contribute, big words, to that relationship. In other words, it's not just a teacher teaching a student.
Yep, like the school model.
Like a school model, right? So if I go up to kids program and I have in my head a school model, then I walk into the room expecting that I'm a teacher and that your son Leo is a student, and we have a one-directional generational faith formation. Whereas I can help him read the Bible better, I can help him understand the story and the narrative of Scripture better.
Remember the 10 Commandments.
Remember the 10 Commandments. I can even help him with holistic faith. I can help him to learn how to pray, and I can teach him how to serve and give him opportunities to serve. So there's lots of things that I can help him do in that traditional model, but it's because it's one directional, and because I think of myself as a teacher and him as a student, I don't expect to learn anything from him. So a teacher metaphor, I think about a school teacher. A school teacher is teaching primary school kids how to do maths. They don't expect to learn any maths from the student because they're the expert and they're just passing it down to the next generation.
Would that apply also from the child's perspective as well?
Totally, yeah. So and I'm not sure how to measure this, but I would hope in some way that the young crew at our church know that I'm expecting to learn from them. Now that's probably one thing I could probably articulate more. But I suppose I try and communicate that when Leo comes up and tells me that what he's been reading in the Bible this week. And I go, that's awesome. What have you been learning? Tell me about it. What have you found out? And I want him to communicate to me, and I want to show excitement and wonder and joy at the fact that he's sharing these things with me. So that would be one way, I guess, that would explain it.
Often his question will, because we're talking about my son, he will usually go, why did they write it like this?
Yeah.
Rather than actually what does it mean sometimes. But,
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Which is a great question.
Yeah. Because then I suppose it does lead to well, it was written in a different language and it was written at a different time and all that kind of thing. But it's
you
still
got to have lots of conversations.
God's overarching, the biblical theology thing of the whole overarching story of the whole Bible. So you could, that makes sense what you're saying.
Yeah. So how does friendship change that? So friendship changes that model. When I walk in to kids program, I'm expected to be friends with them there. I'm an older friend, absolutely. We talked a couple of weeks ago, I think, about that friendship versus leader dynamic, and seeing myself as an older friend, but also as an older brother. There's a family relationship where I do have more experience. I am more mature. I am older, and so I can lead and guide them in a way that they can't. But there is a little bit of that pilgrim idea of you reduce the amount of gap between the mature and the immature, because you do expect that you can learn from them, and you're friends together, which means you want to enjoy the time. You do want to, and so like a little bit of the carnival model, we do want to have fun. Like I do want to enjoy the time we have together. We want to sing songs that they enjoy and play games and let them have choices and those sorts of things. But the friendship's really key. And this is the other corrective to, we bring the kids into our service in order to express intergenerationality.
Okay, because some churches do that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we'll have kids in the service for the first 20 minutes and now we're intergenerational. And I'd say, well, maybe, but again, maybe not, because just because you and I, Joel, are 2 pews away from each other in church, the church gathering itself is not trying to create relationships between the participants. We're all in pews, we're facing the front, we're learning from the person at the front. It's not necessarily helping us to become better friends together just because we're in the same room listening to the same thing. It might give us food in terms of it might give us something to talk about afterwards. And if we do hang around for dinner or for coffee or whatever it is after the gathering, we can think about, you were there, you heard this, I heard this. Oh, well, don't you love that song? I really like that song. But it gives us content that might foster a relationship later, but in itself, the gathering is not fostering intergenerational relationships. And that's why, one of the reasons why we don't prioritise children coming into our gathering as an expression of intergenerational ministry. We actually do the reverse. We have kids in their space and we drip feed safe adults into their ministry through our Chill program. So a Chill leader is an adult who's not responsible for teaching. They just come in as a friend of the kids. And my utopian gold standard is that every safe adult would be a Chill leader.
Yeah, okay.
Because I'd love for all the kids to know all the adults in our church and vice versa. But they're not going to get to know that by being in a room of 100 people and just happen to be singing the same songs with each other. That will happen if a small number of adults come into the kids program and sit beside the kids as they're learning, perhaps, pray with the kids, play with the kids, kick a soccer ball around, play with Play-Doh, build trains, like all the things that cheerleaders do, which is just being friends. And it's also really lovely that it's the kids' space. So the kids are almost like the host of that space, and the adults become the guests. I really like that dynamic as well.
I think, but also it gives those children agency and allows, and them being the host allows, it's almost like flipping that school model to a certain degree, is that allowing, we're coming into your space, you teach us in a sense. But you're not, there's not a formal cognitive teaching idea that you're saying, but it's almost, I remember the last kids' chill that I did, there's very much a strong contingent of boys who love playing with the trains. And I was leading with one of our friends, Peter, and we just sat down and said, what do you guys want to play? And they said, well, with trains. And then some of the girls got some different things out, but then they just went at it themselves. But then as they felt comfortable that we were in their playing space, then they started to welcome us into the game, or say, oh, can you help me with this, or those kind of things. And I only think that way because my mum spent a lot of time in early childhood. Like a huge portion of her career has been in early childhood. So it's fun to just allow that to happen, I think, too. And it's exciting to see that we're doing that within a context of church, but also in the context of our relationship that Jesus has reconciled for us. So It makes a lot of sense. I'm not sure where I'm going with that, but
That's all right.
just as an example of like the difference between let's just have children in the service and said let's have children have their own particular time. They have their own teaching time as well.
They do,
don't they?
which again, because they are developmentally younger than adults.
Yeah.
And so we do want them to grow in their knowledge of Jesus. We do want them to grow in age-appropriate worship and relational capacity with Jesus. And so it is appropriate that they have peer time where we can talk to 5-year-olds as 5-year-olds and 10-year-olds as 10-year-olds. And when you get to teenagers, 15-year-olds as 15-year-olds for the youth group. So that's absolutely appropriate that you have those breakout spaces. And most churches I know would have separate teaching times. So even if they came in, the kids came in for the first half of the of the service, they would nearly all head out where the adults had a adult peer languaged sermon and the kids would have peer languaged teaching
time.
Yeah.
But also, and if someone came to our church and you came to our church for a short period of time, we also do have those times where children come into the service.
We do.
Now,
yes.
So what's the difference between those two?
Yeah.
And why do we do that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So why not just do this all the time? Why ever have kids in? So another thing that's great about having kids in the service, and a lot of my colleagues and peers are doing this with their churches, is that it really is faith formative for kids. So it sounds a little bit too social science, but we're socialising kids into the community, which is exactly what we want to do. We want kids to get to know what does it mean to sit in a service? What does it mean to sing songs, to learn some liturgy, to learn some prayers? What does it look like as a 6-year-old as you look around and you see all these other people who just are rejoicing when they say the Apostles' Creed, and you can see the smile on their face and they say, yeah, I really do believe this is great. And they go, oh, they really believe this is cool. And they're looking around and they've got their eyes open during prayer and they're looking at all the people with their eyes closed and going, well, that's weird, but okay, I guess that's what you do. And they learn to sing the songs, and so there's lots of great things that can happen when you put children in the service. And you're also helping them to express the elements of the services too. Like my kids were pretty young when they enjoyed knowing what the lyrics of the songs were and being able to sing along to the songs.
Mine too.
Yeah. They really enjoy that, and that's wonderful. And there's also the opportunity for young people to participate in the leading of the service. So at a few of our gatherings, we'll have young people reading the Bible, or it might be singing in the band, or whatever it is. So there is good benefits that happen there. And at our church, there are a number of times during the year where we do that. So all of January, we don't run kids program. We just have kids in the service. So that is an all-in, all stage all the time, all age, all stage all the time. We have our Easter weekend, both our Good Friday and our Resurrection Sunday services, everyone together. There's no separate kids program. Everyone's together, one at church, one down in the park. At our week away, which we're coming up to soon, we start every morning with similar to what many of my friends are doing every week, which is the kids are in for the first 20 minutes. They're part of the songs, they hear the community announcements, we play a video, which is often just silly and joyful and sometimes relates to the talk, but not often. And so that's really fun. And then the kids go out and do their kids' program time while the adults do their time. What else? Oh, Christmas. So Christmas Eve and Christmas Day are the same that the kids are in. So there's a number of punctuations throughout the year where we do that. And then we also on Friday night, because we have a gathering on Friday night, which is directly after Kids Club, everyone from year 5 to however is in that service every week.
Year 10.
Well, year 10, and then
yeah.
their families and their leaders. And the difference between Friday night and our other gatherings is when you and I go to a Friday night gathering, we are generationally outnumbered.
Yes,
so
that's true.
It's majority year 5 to year 10 crew, plus some of their families, plus their leaders. But most of the room is teenagers or preteen. And that's wonderful, really joyful. And I've had a number of parents who have kind of said to me in a whisper, "Oh, I really enjoy the Friday service because it's just got heaps of energy, and we don't get that in some of the other services." And I'm like, "No, you definitely don't get some of that energy in some of the other services.
Bring the energy,
Bring
man.
the energy." So, and that's really fun. So whereas if kids come to our other gatherings, they will be generationally outnumbered. So they will be in the minority. As you look around, you see a lot of millennials, middle agers, senior saints in most of our other gatherings. So there are lots of times. So weekly on a Friday, all kids, and again, a lot of younger siblings will sometimes come as well because they're picking up an older sibling or dropping off an older sibling for youth group, and they'll stick around for gathering. So everyone is welcome on that Friday, and they could all be there every week. And then for our 2 Saturday nights, 2 Sunday mornings, and 1 Sunday night congregation, they have separate kids chill programs that are running at the same time but in a different space to church.
What do you think? So we're talking about Friday night there, which starts with Fuse, which is year 5 and year 6. We have a gathering in the middle, followed by dinner.
Dinner first.
Dinner first, then the gathering. Then youth group happens after that.
Yep.
I know quite a while ago on the Shock Zombie you talked about this, but I want to kind of reiterate that. What's the benefit of having, even though we say we're intergenerational church, what's the benefit of having age-specific or age, especially in the youth, especially in the younger generations, what's the benefit of having specifically designed spaces for their ages?
Yeah, so some models will say, let's eliminate all age-based programs. So there's the one really key youth ministry theorist, expert called Malin Nell, who's in South Africa. And so he wrote a chapter in a book called 4 Views of Youth Ministry, which it was called Inclusive Congregationalism. And his argument was largely, don't do any peer programming. Young people should always be all in all the time. So there is a trend, not a trend, there's a particular ministry philosophy that says this is the best way to do church. We've looked at that and we've gone, I can see the benefits of that, and then we do have opportunities where we are all in all the time. But there are also good arguments for, particularly at younger developmental stages, to be able to express the gospel, to be able to teach the gospel, to be able to get kids to express faith in age-appropriate ways. And we all instinctively know that a 3-year-old is different to an 8-year-old, who's different to a 12-year-old. There's different words that they can understand, concepts they can arrive at. There's different things that capture their attention. There's different ways that they're going to express faith. A 3-year-old expressing prayer is going to look different to an 8-year-old expressing prayer and different to a 15-year-old expressing prayer. So giving them space to know they can do that in amongst peers is really, really helpful. And I don't think it stops with youth either. There are, as young dads who have kids, and my kids are a bit older than yours, but
thank you for calling me young.
Yeah, that's all right. I was calling myself young.
I've got more time than you to get to 90.
You do, that's right. There's a great opportunity for when dads hang out together and think about dadding.
Yep.
And it's great when young adults hang out together and think about young adulting. And it's great when senior saints get to hang out and do senior saint conversations because they're all a particular life stage. My parents have just moved into a retirement village up the road here, and one of the reasons they moved there rather than sort of just buying a unit in South Village or somewhere else was they actually wanted the automatic community that comes with a whole lot of people who are at that stage of life. And so there's great joy there. And so there is great value in hanging out with peers, and definitely from a faith formative perspective, for young people to hang out with peers and to be interacted with by their leaders in age appropriate ways. Absolutely, there's really great value in that. So we create those spaces. We have kids programs. We have kids club on Friday for year 5 and 6s. We have youth group. And we have other ministries as well that go on. So that's really valuable. What an intergenerational model and a number of theologies and theories that intersect with that is that it's not enough. That God's actually made us to have intergenerational discipleship. And so it's great for Well, and then there's a difference between you and I. Like my kids are now in high school.
Yeah.
So it's great for you to hang out with other dads whose kids are all in primary school together, and you can celebrate and commiserate over the joys and challenges
Yep.
of having kids in preschool. But then there's real value for us hanging out together because my kids are 5 years older. And you can say, hey, Tim, did you go through this with your kids? I'm like, oh, man, yeah, absolutely. We went through that. Here's some ways we dealt with it. Oh, that's really cool. And then I can, with teenage kids, I can talk to those who have got, recently empty nesters and say, oh, man, tell me this teenaging gets better because, it's really hard. Or, oh, how good is it when you notice your teenager achieve these skills and grow in these competencies? And the empty nesters can say, oh, yeah, that's such a joy, isn't it? Yeah, I remember when my kids were that age. And they encourage me like that. And you talk to grandparents and you say, what was it like for you to parent, a whole generation and a half ago? And they can share and they can talk about things. So we're designed to be intergenerational. We're designed to have intergenerational discipleship. And there's a whole lot of value with hanging out with those who are older and more experienced with us, and also learning from those who are younger than us. And so that mutual, both way collaboration in relationships is really, really key as well.
Can you talk also about we've said a number of times before that meals are very integral. How do we do church here at Sorrow Bible? We have a meal at every one of our gatherings. From a children's pastor's perspective, how does that fit into the children's ministry strategy?
Yeah. So meals create the space where we can keep fostering the relationships and the friendships that we're developing. And so what we find is that there's a number of kids, most kids will just kind of gravitate to their own peers and have dinner together. But we also notice that because there's a significant number of adults who they've spent time with in Chill, that they'll also talk to them as well. And they actually genuinely see those people as friends. And so it's not just, here's the kids' table, kids, you sit over there. There is no kids' table. All the tables are exactly the same size.
Well, that's not true. All the tables are all over the place and they're all different sizes a lot of the time.
Yes, yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag. But yes, kids, you're over there.
Yeah, there's not a
adults, you're over there. There's not a designated space. And so what that means is that kids are freely moving through all of those other relationships and can stop. So you weren't on Chill this week, but Marlo walks past you and goes, oh, Joel, we played trains last week. And you go, yeah, it was really cool. Did you get to play trains this week? Who was playing trains with you this week? And just get that little conversation with a preschool kid. And so that's really exciting. And so it creates the space. And we've talked about this many seasons ago now, but that meals, again, aren't inherently intergenerational because people can choose to sit with people who are just like themselves. But it creates the opportunity and it creates the space which facilitates the possibilities. So what you need is enough regulars who have bought into the idea that this is a space where I can hang out with people who are unlike me, who are then looking around and maybe intentionally going to sit next to those who might find that a little bit harder. Adolescence, hard, difficult, lots of emotions going on. It might be a bit hard to find relationships and you feel safe with those who are just like yourself. But if you just have 2 or 3 older adults who are confident enough in themselves to go sit where all the adolescents are hanging out and just go, hey guys, how you doing? Tell us about high school this week. What's going on? And can have that conversation. It's going to be weird sometimes. They're going to go, oh, who's this person? This is an old man. Can't talk to me. But just to not be weird about it, but just to enjoy and slowly start to break down. So it's about creating this space. And so what I often say to children's leaders, and this was particularly my Sunday morning children's ministry when I was trying to build that team for the first time, and they're on Chill leadership once a month. And what I kept saying to them is, you're only rostered onto Chill once a month. You're the kids' friends every week.
Yep.
And so if I see you at church every week, we always at least give a smile and say good day.
Yeah.
And if there aren't other relationships going on, we might slow down and have more of a conversation. And I want everyone to see the kids in the same way. It might just be they run past you on the way to the games table and you just get to scream out, "Hey, Aiden, how you going? Good, thanks." And off he's gone, right? That might be it. That might be all you get. Or it might be that actually I go and sit at the games table and I say, "Hey, guys, how you going?" I'm like, "Oh, yeah, no, I don't want to. You guys keep playing, but as you're playing, let's just chat about life." And we've got the time and the space to do that. Yeah.
And it feels like that's what the meals allows. It's the as you're saying, the opportunity and the space to be able to further deepen relationships with anyone of any age, really. But it also applies to our children and youth in the same way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you think of one time? What's one time that sticks in your mind where maybe unexpectedly one of our younger people taught you something? Because you're talking about that as an example of how we can learn from the younger generations. Can you pinpoint a time where you really?
Oh, just my very fallible memory. I love it when kids ask questions because that, particularly ones I don't know the answer to, because then they then get a good sense that we're doing this together. We're learning this together.
Yeah, it shows you're on the same level trying to work it out. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I want to be a good older friend. I want to be a good big brother to them. And part of that is helping them see that there are things that I have thought about and know about that they can come and talk to me about. And I want that for them. I don't want them to have this sort of, Tim on a pedestal as the expert kind of view. I want them to realise that I'm still learning, I'm still growing. There's things I don't know. And I also want them to wonder. And this is what is really joyful is when you get you pose questions. I love I'm not very good at it, but I try and find a question we can ask of the Bible that the Bible doesn't actually answer.
Okay.
Because then you can just wonder together. And there's no necessarily right or wrong answer. It's just, what do you know? Someone who's very good at this was a colleague who used to work with Emma. And I listened to her give a talk once at a conference, and she was talking to all these primary school kids. And she was telling the story of Adam and Eve in the garden and had sort of told the narrative. And then she asked, I wonder what they talked about, Adam and Eve, when they were hanging out in the garden.
Yeah.
And it was a great question because there's no right or wrong answer. We don't know. We don't even know how long they were hanging out in the garden for. Was it days, weeks, months, years? Who knows? But the responses that came from the kids just thought they were in the story.
Engaged.
They were engaged. They were thinking. And one kid could talk, they were talking about Grand Theft Auto. And you just go, well, that's not obviously a wrong answer. But
because it didn't exist.
Yeah, it just didn't exist. So there's probably some wrong answers, but there's a whole lot of possibly right answers, which is really joyful. Yeah. And I don't know, I'm just trying to think. There's one kid I had a conversation with a few, I might have been last year sometime. We were praying for each other, and he asked me to pray for him at school. And I said, what's going on there? And he just goes, I just don't like school. And I was like, is it like the subjects are hard, or don't like the teachers, or you're having friend issues? Like, is there something going on? And he just goes, I just get in trouble all the time. And I thought, yeah, I can see that. Because it's kind of, I can see that, your personality, your behaviour would get you in trouble all the time. And what I'm learning through that is, he's sharing his life with me. So I'm learning from him the things that he values, the things that are on his mind. I get to sit with him in that. I get to pray for him. But then it reciprocates in the way that I think about, okay, well, how am I running kids program? Am I running kids program in a way that he's going to get in trouble all the time? Or am I running kids program in a way that he can, participate? Not with chaos, no one benefits from chaos, but from being able to participate in that space and grow in that space, and for me to create a space where he can be friends and express friendship. And because we're both reconciled to Jesus, we can be reconciled to each other.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. Because I was going to ask you, but the first thing I was going to say is that when you're saying we're working this out together, I think it also models humility to the kids, and saying that, well, we don't know everything, but God does, so let's work this out together. So I like that. My last question, I think you kind of touched on it just at the end of your last answer there, was if someone's listening to this and they think, this sounds all great, but it sounds like a lot of work. Like we've spoken about how you have studied this for a very long time and you're very passionate about it. But we've also talked about in the last, 5 or 6 episodes about gospel opportunities as well. What would you say are the main benefits of approaching children's ministry with this particular strategic approach? I think this is a good way to wrap up the episode.
Yeah, what are the benefits? That's great. There's a number of long-term benefits, and we've talked before on the podcast about there's an important study that comes out of Fuller Youth Institute in LA that they study young adults who are grown up in church, and they investigate what's the difference between those who are still following Jesus and those who are not following Jesus. And the most statistically significant difference between those two was that those who were still following Jesus could identify 5 or more adults who were intentionally engaged with them, and they knew them by name and cared about them in church. And those who were no longer following Jesus couldn't. And I'm pretty sure it's not parents. So at least 5 adults, not your parents, in addition to your parents, who you knew cared for you at church. And so this comes to the writers talk about, Chap Clark, Cara Powell, talk about, we often think about a 5-to-1 ratio, in that if you have 1 leader for every 5 kids, you're doing pretty good with ministry ratios. And they say, no, we've got to flip that. We've got to try and have 5 adults invested in every kid, so that every kid at church can look around and they can identify 5 adults who are investing with them. So what the benefit of this model is we're actually trying to create those opportunities. Not really structured, like we haven't told Leo, here's your 5 adults. But if you ask Leo, hey, are there adults who care about you at church? Who are the safe people at church that you could go to if you were ever worried? I think that he would be able to list off at least 5 people, because they're people who have spent time with him, who have built relationship with him, who have played with him, that have, whatever it is, they've engaged in relationship with Leo in safe and appropriate ways. And so all the kids, I hope, at our church could look around and say, we have a whole family of teenagers, adults, senior saints here, some who are like grandparents, some who are like uncles and aunties, some who are like parents, some who are like older brothers and sisters, who know me by name, who care about me, who have spent time with me, and love me because they were first loved by Jesus.
Yes.
And they might not be able to articulate it in those words, but that's what I'm hoping for every kid. What are the other benefits? Personally, a benefit is I'm really terrible at craft. I never have to think about craft because it's not a priority. The relationship is a priority. So you can do craft to get to a relationship, but it's not important to me that we have a craft that matches the teaching time, because then you've got to take home to talk to the parents about. And again, lots of cool things about that. It doesn't suit my ministry style, and so I don't have to spend a lot of time. And I've got, again, peers in ministry who will just spend a whole day cutting out this thing and then sourcing candles for this and buying paints and setting up. And it's like, first I don't have time, I only 1 day a week. But also my team doesn't have to. If people enjoy craft, and we've got Tracy McCall,
legend,
living legend. She needs to write a book.
Craft legend.
Yeah. And she's awesome. And the kids love it when Tracy's on chill, because they're like, yes, it's craft time. But likewise, they love it when Paul Tate is on chill, because yes, it's go outside and play basketball time. Like, everyone brings their own little thing and they get to share a little bit of themselves with the kids. But yeah, it's a different kind of preparation time. It's a different kind of how I spend my time in ministry. And so that's really beneficial as well.
I think that's a really good way to end. I think focusing on the benefits and the long-term faith opportunities, I think is really exciting. So thank you for your ministry.
Pleasure. It's a joy.
And your passion. So I really value that. If you are still interested in talking about children's ministry, you can get in contact with us via joel@shockabsorber.com.au. Send me an email and we can get If you want to challenge us on any kind of intergenerational or children's ministry strategy ideas, we'd love to hear from you. If you've got anything else that you'd like us to talk about, you can still email me.
You can email you?
Email me.
Right.
Email Joel. But that will wrap us up for this episode. Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you to Ek, our producer, who always puts these podcasts together for us. Thank you to Stu, who wasn't able to be here, but still enables us to think about these things. And as always, we'll finish this episode with a one way.
One way.
One way.